Hi folks, and welcome back to Contract Law. This is video 1 in the series on privity of contract. Privity of contract is a nice little topic we get to discuss in law school. It has some quirks that you'll get to know well. However, largely they don't tend to pose too many problems for us anymore, thankfully. What do we mean by privity? Just simply as you can see on the graphic I've chosen for this Prezi, you've got a contract involving party A and party B, and somehow, somewhere in that contract is something to do with party C. And privity of contract is the doctrine that would say, party C, sorry, you can't really do much about the contract between party A and party B because you are not part of that contract. You are not privy to that contract. Okay, so looking first at the overview, and I also like this graphic because it's kind of got this broken circle, and that to me says a lot about the doctrine of privity. You know, it seems to be a fairly harsh doctrine, and it does have some harsh consequences sometimes. However, there have been many chinks that have been found in the armour of the doctrine of privity.
Sir, I have a plan, sir.
And we'll certainly get to know a few of those today. What is it all about? As I said just before, it involves a contract between A and B that somehow either confers benefits on C or purports to impose burdens on party C. And the doctrine of privity really works out what C, party C, can do about what's contained in the contract between A and B. Can that contract impose burdens? Can it confer benefits? So, stating the rule, it can be stated pretty simply, actually. Only the parties to a contract are legally entitled to enforce its benefits, and only the parties to a contract are legally bound by its burdens or its obligations. Duties is another synonym there. So a third party, in our case party C, can't enforce the benefits or be bound by its burdens. Now, when you think about that, the rationale is fairly clear. The whole doctrine started to emerge in about the mid-19th century, the 1850s, when a lot of the significant doctrines in contract law were starting to emerge in England. And this whole notion of contract as a bargain, we have discussed in other video series. It's all really intertwined with that. In our little example, party A and party B are the parties to the bargain. Okay, they've exchanged their promises, they've agreed to be bound by obligations, including benefits, including burdens, and they've swapped consideration for the promises. That the consideration might be the promise itself. I will promise to pay you $50 in return for you doing my toenail painting, for example. Now, I need myself and the other party, A and B, would be parties to that particular bargain. I've promised to pay the $50. The other party has promised to do my beauty salon work, for example. Everybody else is a stranger to that bargain. And so the whole doctrine of privity protects that notion of the contract being voluntarily entered between the two parties and those parties voluntarily undertaking the burdens and getting the benefits of that particular contract. Now, in terms of the operation of the doctrine of privity, no one really has a problem with the notion that party A and party B in a contract can't just, purport to somehow impose burdens, duties, obligations on party C that is not a party to that original contract. I think that just makes sense. However, the more difficult issue historically has been, should that party C be able to enforce the benefit of a contract between A and B? Okay, if A says to B, I'll give you $50 if you do something for C, then should C be able to enforce that obligation of B to do something for them? It kind of tends to accord with, your gut feel, the vibe, the rightness, the morality of the situation. C in that circumstance should be able to do something about that. And that is where all the torturous disputes in relation to privity seem to have occurred. Now, you're probably thinking, as you're looking at that previous set of graphics with benefits and burdens and transfers going on, hang on a minute, this sounds a lot like consideration and the doctrine of consideration. Things have to move across from each party. And yes, the doctrine of privity is absolutely interrelated with the doctrine of consideration. Both notions grew up around, as I said, that mid-19th century mark. And there has been some debate in commentary about whether it is just, in fact, one grand doctrine or whether there are two separate principles at play. The High Court's basically come down on the side of saying, well, you know what, it really doesn't matter, but the better view is probably that there are two separate principles at play, hence we treat each principle separately in this unit. And so some of this case law should certainly ring bells for you. If you look at the notion of transferring benefits to third parties and third parties trying to sue to get their hands on those benefits, Tweddle and Atkinson, we've looked at that in the video series on consideration. If you recall, that was the case where Mr. Tweddle was engaged to one Mr. Guy's daughter. Mr. Guy and Tweddle's father agreed each to kick in £100 to start the young couple off on their merry way in marriage. And, rather perplexingly, they also agreed that Mr. Tweddle could sue on it. Mr. Guy died, the father-in-law died without having paid up, and Mr. Tweddle did what would be expected. He sued for his unpaid £100. It was held that Mr. Tweddle failed. Why is that? Well, the judgment has hallmarks of both consideration and privity, okay, as they've come to be known. The bench said no stranger to the consideration can take advantage of a contract, although made for his benefit. No stranger. And there we have this notion of a third party standing out on their lonesome in the cold, so to speak, and the parties that are exchanging the consideration. And it's only those parties that are going to get the goodies involved with that contract. No stranger to the consideration can take advantage of a contract, even though it's made for their benefit. Harsh doctrine? Yes. Now, as I said, the notion of being able to impose benefits is perhaps a little bit more intuitive. You just shouldn't be able to impose burdens on unsuspecting third parties. Dunlop pneumatic tyre, we've also come across this case in our consideration video series. If you recall, we discussed that ad nauseum. Terrible Latin phrase there, I know, but it is quite an interesting case to get your head around. If you recall, Dunlop sold discounted tyres to Dew, an intermediary, Dew, and then Dew on-sold to Selfridge. When Dunlop sold to Dew, it made Dew promise that if it sold to trade customers, it would get a promise from them not to undercut Dunlop's list price. Very important to Dunlop that it could maintain its high price for its tyres. Its reputation was at stake. It didn't want its tyres going out on a fire sale price kind of basis. So Do actually did sell to a trade customer, which was Selfridge. Do actually got the promise from Selfridge not to undercut Dunlop's list price. Selfridge agreed not to do so and then did the naughty thing, obviously, and engaged in a bit of price cutting. So Dunlop, being rather ticked off, sued Selfridge. So Selfridge and Do are the ones that have the contract together, and in amongst that contractual deal was this promise from Selfridge to Do that it wouldn't undercut Dunlop's price. Dunlop trying to sue to enforce that promise was a stranger to that contract between Do and Selfridge. Obviously, Dunlop failed. As we saw in our videos on consideration, Dunlop also ran the agency argument, and we'll go into that a little bit more later on today. So, good early example of just a case showing us that if you're a third party to a contract that contains burdens, you can't sue to enforce those burdens if you are that third party. Problems. What are the problems here? Well, on face value, some circumstances, particularly not being able to enforce burdens, the Privity doctrine can seem to operate on a fairly reasonable level. However, particularly in relation to suing to enforce a benefit, it seems, as I said before, there should be chinks in that particular armour because it seems to accord with the way we want things to be able to go. What are the remedies then that would be available in that kind of situation? Well, where the doctrine of privity stands in C's way, probably the best they can do is to get their friend to the main contract, either party A or party B, to sue to enforce their rights for them. That's going to be a fairly big ask if you think about it, because most actions in court will cost time, a lot of money. When you think about it, the average litigation is going to cost you upwards of $100,000. So it's a pretty big ask to get one of the parties to that main contract to sue for you. Even if they do, what are they going to get? Well, again, you run up against some difficulties if the party to the main contract that is suing to try and get some kind of remedy here in relation to C, the best probably thing that they will ask for is specific performance, an order for specific performance from the court. That's okay. It would suit, presumably, the parties to the main contract and also the third party C that's out in the wings there. However, specific performance isn't always available. As you'll see in later video series, it's only really available where damages are inappropriate. And if that's the case and you're looking at an issue of damages, then if party A or party B, one of the parties to the main contract sues, because the real loss has been out here by virtue of C not getting what they should have got, whoever is the party to the main contract that's suing in this instance for the breach of the other main party's duty to perform in relation to C, the damages will usually only be nominal. And nominal damages can be as low as $1. It's just some token amount that's set by the court to show that there has been a wrong done, to show that there's been a breach. So the doctrine of privity can really cause some mucky consequences for C that they can't easily get out of in terms of getting party A or B, someone involved in the main contract, to sue on their behalf. So this is where we have had a whole load of ingenious ways around the doctrine of privity. And one of the big attempts to actually squash and That's an elegant word, isn't it? To attempt to abolish the doctrine of privity came in the High Court case of Trident and McNeice. And having whipped up your anticipation about the Trident case, I'm going to leave this video here.
Wake me up before you go. Don't leave me hanging on like a yo-yo.
That's about all we need for an introductory video, and I'll come back for video 2 on Privity, and we will have a look at the Trident case. Until then, bye guys.